Hello, my name is Kiana Park. I'm with Spy Pump Partners. I'm the principal investigator for this project NCHRP 2044-45, supporting state DOT adoption of knowledge management practices. I'm here with Francis Harrison, who led a lot of the technical work on this project. All right. So this webinar is focused on providing you a summary of the results of this project, which examined knowledge management activities across state DOTs and developed practical resources to support agencies implementing knowledge management. In this webinar, we'll review why knowledge management is becoming increasingly important for transportation agencies. We will then summarize the project, discuss what we learned from reviewing KM practices across all state DOTs, introduce the KM practices framework developed through this research, and highlight the lessons learned from several agency case studies. Transportation agencies are facing significant workforce transitions. Many experienced staff are retiring, while agencies must adapt to new technologies, changing public expectations, and increasing complexity in infrastructure systems. Without deliberate efforts to capture and transfer knowledge, critical expertise can be lost. The goal of this project was to support implementation of knowledge management in state transportation agencies by documenting current practices and translating them into practical guidance that agencies can use. It builds on prior CAM research, including NCHRP Report 813 and SCAN 12-04 on transportation agency knowledge management. Engage with state DOTs at different stages of KM implementations to learn from their experiences, catalog and share information about knowledge management practices across agencies, and develop practical approaches for continuing to capture and update KM practices over time. Knowledge management refers to a set of practices that help organizations capture and share knowledge across the workforce. This includes both tacit knowledge held by experienced employees and explicit knowledge documented in manuals, procedures, and systems. So the focus of the remainder of the webinar is to share with you the research products that were developed through this project and share so that you can understand how you might be able to use it for your own advancement of KM in your organizations. So let's get started. So the first research product that was developed on this project was a KM practices summary for the 51 state DOTs that exist in the US. All right, so what this was a synthesis of DOT KM activities. We actually compiled information for all 51 state DOTs. The 51st one is Puerto Rico. Agencies were categorized by KM maturity based on what we saw as their practices. So they were either the highest level was a practitioner. They're actually doing KM and using it, applying it. An explorer, meaning they are actively exploring the use. There are initiatives underway and they're moving towards becoming a practitioner. And then discoverer, meaning, they're in the very early stages. They're trying to discover how KM can be applied in their agencies and the value can deliver. So the key information that we collected was the level of KM implementation that they have, the name and location and positions of KM leads and practitioners, specific KM activities that they are engaged in, and then the actual practices that they have embedded in their organizations. The sources of information for all of this were literature reviews, the AASHTO Committee on Knowledge Management surveys that captured a lot of information, outreach to the KM leads who we identified, and we conducted 14 in-depth interviews with many, and you see the list of DOTs that we talked to. And so 45 out of the 51 state DOTs provided direct information to us. The ones we did have information for the additional 6, but those were captured through the work of AASHTO and previous research efforts. All right, so you can see here we've documented the status of KM implementation in state DOTs, and you can see here that, around 50% of states are discoverers, so they're in the early stage. The next largest group are the explorers, so they're testing out KM, and there are some initiatives underway. And then in terms of practitioners, you can see here in the dark blue the agencies where they are practicing KM implementation. So KM, lead units for explorers and practitioners, where do they sit? So 26 people provided input on this, 26 agencies. And so you can see that KM is most dominantly in the HR, employee development side, followed by the research and innovation groups of a DOT. And then there was a various mix of different places that KM were sitting, and administration had about 8%. And then we organized KM practices. This was our first kind of task where we produced a product. And you'll see later that we have definitions slightly differently for what we defined as KM practices. But for this exercise, we organized KM practices into these 5 categories: knowledge, strategy, and orchestration, employee experience capture, information curation and management, knowledge transfer, and workforce planning and development. So KM practices are pervasive at all DOTs, but not necessarily centrally managed or orchestrated. So you can see where they're distributed across these activities. Most DOTs have mentoring, cross-training, and shadowing practices. Over 60% can tap into retiree expertise. Less than 50% can double fill positions. So you can see just some of the highlights of what we found. Most common knowledge transfer practices are communities and peer-assisted peer reviews. So you can see that here in the survey responses to what the agencies are practicing. The strongest areas for knowledge strategy and orchestration are facilitating group discussions and improving organizational cultures. And then most DOTs maintain documentation and provide repositories. Several noted that these are areas for improvement. The least implemented are expertise directories. So this is under information curation and management. And then under the employee experience capture, over 70% of DOTs are capturing best practices, doing after-action reviews and/or lessons learned. Almost 30% are doing knowledge interviews. So that's a snapshot of what we learned through the the survey we conducted with the KM leads. And Francis is now going to come and talk about the case studies.
This next part of the webinar highlights one of the key products of NCHRP Project 2044-45, Case Studies of KM Practices. These case studies highlight how 5 different agencies have approached knowledge management implementation. The agencies featured are Maryland State Highway Administration, Michigan DOT, North Carolina DOT, Utah DOT, and Virginia DOT. Agency KM practices are always evolving, so it's important to state upfront that these case studies were developed during 2025 and represent a snapshot in time. Each of the agencies included had a KM lead or group and 1 or more KM initiatives underway that would be of interest to other DOTs. Collectively, the 5 agencies have a diverse set of KM practices, so there are a wide range of models and practices represented, and this material should provide something of interest and potential applicability to most other DOTs. Each case study is structured in a consistent way to allow for comparison across the agencies and to help people absorb this material. The main contents of each case study are shown on the slide. They include an overview and a description of the key program elements, identification of where responsibility for KM rests in the organization, a chronology of the activities that the agency used to develop and roll out the initiatives, information on resourcing of the activities where that was available, highlights of the results or major accomplishments and benefits realized, and the agency's assessment of the lessons that they learned and how they faced challenges and what were the important success factors for them, and identification of their future plans. In addition, each case study has links and references that can be consulted for additional details on the agency's activities. So I'm going to highlight some of the key aspects of each of the 5 agencies' KM practices. So first of all, Maryland State Highway Administration. This agency's efforts date back to the mid-2000s, and those early efforts were part of an agency performance excellence initiative. Fast forward to the 2020s, and there was a key milestone in 2022 with establishment of an Information and Knowledge Management Officer position. That position has responsibility both for knowledge management and records management, and it's located within the agency's policy and research area. In addition to building a website with a variety of KM resources to build awareness of KM practices and tools, the IKMO's major focus has been on building an authoritative repository of standard operating procedures. And in conjunction with this, setting up rules and processes for developing and updating the SOPs. As of the time of this case study, there were over 150 SOPs in the repository. Michigan DOT integrated a knowledge management element into their 2020 Workforce and Succession Planning System effort. Their knowledge management efforts have emphasized building a learning culture, and that has involved setting up over 20 communities of learning. Communities of learning can provide a forum for brainstorming, knowledge sharing, and collaboration, and MDOT views these as an essential part of KM implementation. North Carolina's KM activities are led out of its value management function, located under strategic planning and programming. Their focus has been setting up a program called CLEAR. It stands for Communicate Lessons, Exchange Advice, and Record. The CLEAR program allows employees to share and communicate lessons learned and best practices. The agency used 2 research projects to design and implement the program and its supporting database. They have also set up an expert review panel to review and validate the submittals into CLEAR. The CLEAR knowledge base currently has over 250 lessons and over 325 best practices, and it continues to grow. The agency was testing an AI-based search capability at the time of this case study that allows employees to find materials in the knowledge base relevant to their current projects. Utah DOT's knowledge management activities are led out of its employee development function, but there's extensive collaboration with other groups, most notably technology and innovation. Key elements of UDOT's KM-related activities include position playbooks, which document essential information about different positions at the agency and pass along critical knowledge to successor. Second, a policy repository and update process with an AI chatbot to allow employees to access relevant information. At the time of the case study, there were over 230 policies in the repository. Finally, Virginia DOT is known for having the earliest formalized knowledge management program among state DOTs. Its program began in 2004 and has evolved continuously since then. Their current KM program has been branded as the Learning Organization, and it's run out of the agency's Performance Transformation Division. This division also handles performance management and process improvement. One of the most notable KM elements at VDOT now is their Job Books program. That's been underway for about 10 years. And job books are created for positions that have high turnover, high retirement potential, and high impact. Each job book covers a position which may be held by multiple employees across the organization. Job books provide a succinct summary of the position's responsibilities and major activities, a list of important resources such as standards, manuals, and applications, and also tips and helpful hints to maximize an employee's success. As of 2025, there were 63 job books covering over 900 positions at the agency, and the job book program is quite mature. It has an established and documented process, and it has recognized value within the agency. It also has an easily accessible online repository that provides access to these job books for both desktop and mobile devices. VDOT's Learning Organization team also supports a number of other synergistic activities, including the agency's statewide working groups. These working groups are forms of communities of practice that facilitate feedback loops between policy and field implementation. Learning Organization also helps with strategic consulting for process improvements across the agency. Now I'm going to talk about a third major product of this project, which is the KM Practices document. This document leverages information identified in the case study. There are 11 essential KM practices covered that state DOTs can consider for implementation. The 11 practices are organized into these 5 categories shown on the slide. First, knowledge strategy and orchestration. That includes practices to plan, coordinate, and support knowledge management activities. Second is social learning and communities. That includes practices to cultivate a learning culture and facilitate collaboration and knowledge sharing. Third is knowledge capture. This includes practices to identify, capture, and share critical at-risk knowledge that has not yet been documented. The fourth category is workforce planning and development. This includes practices to integrate knowledge management with the agency's workforce strategic planning, succession management, and employee training and development activities. And finally, information and curation management. This includes practices to create, maintain, and enable access, findability, and discoverability of information that employees need to do their jobs. The next set of slides cover each of these 11 practices. The first 2 practices are in the knowledge, strategy, and orchestration category. The first practice is creating a KM strategy. Now, this is something that should be considered by agencies that are just getting started with KM or agencies that want to move forward in a more intentional and focused manner. The practice allows an agency to build awareness of what KM is and how it can benefit the agency, and chart a course for implementation. Key aspects of this practice are to link the KM strategy to the agency's overall plan or priorities. It's important to enlist an executive sponsor and assemble a team to lead strategy development, and that can include both internal staff as well as external experts. Gathering information on current practices, pain points, and risks is important to inform the strategy creation process. Once the strategy has been agreed upon, the final step is to designate a group to monitor implementation and keep things on track. Some notable examples of how DOTs have approached this include Michigan, Minnesota, Tennessee, and Maryland State Highway Administration. Agencies have created KM strategies through research projects and leadership training class projects, so there are many options available for getting this done. The implementation step is key here to make sure that the agency moves forward and that the strategy just doesn't sit on the shelf. Providing KM guidance for employees is the second practice, and this is an important foundational step for building awareness of KM and helping employees to understand what they can be doing to share what they know with others. Some ideas for doing this include creating and distributing a KM brochure or presentation, developing short videos about KM, creating a website with information on different KM practices and tools, and or starting a Lunch and Learn internal webinar series. Implementation of this practice involves first scoping what you intend to do, creating the website and or materials, conducting outreach to disseminate the materials, and then periodically refreshing what's out there. Maryland SHA and Michigan DOT provide some notable examples on how to do this. I particularly recommend the Michigan DOT videos on knowledge management and their entire workforce and succession planning system. They're very well done. There are 3 practices in the social learning and communities category. Practice 3, building a learning culture, involves intentional activities to create an environment that's conducive to learning and knowledge sharing. Implementation can be done in different ways, but key steps typically are first, to have the agency leaders buy into this and clearly articulate that this is part of their vision for the organization. Second, to conduct an honest assessment of the current state of the culture through surveys and small group sessions. Third, to enhance the agency's workforce learning and development programs and look at including things like mentoring and coaching as part of that. Fourth, to look at ways to embed learning into everyday work. And this can include integrating lessons learned sessions or after action reviews at key project phases or major initiatives. And finally, to actively monitor outcomes from these activities and make adjustments to improve their effectiveness. Practice 4 includes providing specific support for learning communities. Learning communities are also sometimes called communities of practice or COPs, and these are groups of employees working in a common discipline, practice, or interest area who interact, collaborate, and learn from each other. This is a very effective way to connect newer employees with others who know the ropes and to build relationships across employees in similar roles who might be geographically dispersed. Implementing this practice involves developing guidance for new communities, including sample charters, offering personal assistance to help communities get started, and offering facilitation support for setting up, conducting, and documenting meetings. Finally, helping with tracking the products and outcomes from communities, which can be used then by other communities and also by agency managers to understand the value provided. Michigan and Virginia DOTs provide good examples of how to support learning communities. The third and last practice in the social learning and communities category is to provide collaboration tools. Now, this is something that's already being done by many DOTs, especially following the increase in remote and hybrid work arrangements following the pandemic. While most activities provide team sites and video conferencing support, tools can also provide more focused support for KM by supporting things like one-stop shops for key employee resources and helping to connect employees with agency subject matter experts for help with specific issues, and also sharing lessons learned and best practices that have been identified through other KM activities. Georgia and North Carolina DOTs provide good examples of these more focused efforts. There are two practices in the knowledge capture category. First is to capture unique and critical employee job knowledge before it walks out the door and is lost forever. This can help with onboarding of successors, providing information that might not be part of existing position descriptions or manuals. Implementing this practice involves first selecting the approach to be used. This can include simple things like conducting basic knowledge interviews with employees or more resource-intensive processes like developing job books or creating in-depth products that capture specialized expertise. Second is creating either an interview protocol or templates for knowledge capture. Third is mapping out the process that is going to be used to do the knowledge capture, from prioritizing employees for capture to setting up the capture sessions, to reviewing and validating what's captured, and then sharing it so that it can be accessed. Fourth is piloting the templates and process and make adjustments based on what is learned from those pilots. And finally, communication activities to spread awareness of what's being done and why, and encourage participation. Mississippi, Virginia, Utah, and Minnesota DOTs provide good examples of how different agencies have approached this practice. And also NCHRP 23-36, scheduled for completion in 2026, is providing in-depth guidance for knowledge capture. So that will be an important resource for DOTs. The second knowledge capture practice involves capturing and sharing lessons learned. This practice involves an opportunity for employees to reflect on what's been learned and what other people who are going to be doing similar things should know so that they don't repeat mistakes and they build on what has been done in the past. Implementing this practice involves first developing the approach to define when and how the lessons will be captured, then designating a sponsor and then a lead to guide and manage the effort, creating guidance, including perhaps templates for the lessons learned sessions, doing a pilot, and then rolling out the guidance to the agency. Lessons learned can be captured following major projects or program rollouts, and this is an activity that can and should be integrated with community of practice or learning community activities. North Carolina and Virginia DOT provide some good examples of capturing and sharing lessons learned. Moving on to the fourth category, workforce planning and development. Practice 8 involves integrating knowledge management with employee training and development activities. The goal here is to take advantage of synergies between activities for knowledge transfer and activities for employee training and development. When KM is part of employee development, this may happen naturally to some extent, but otherwise, this will require intentional coordination across these two functions so that both KM and employee development activities are being informed by the same information about competency and knowledge gaps in the agency. Also, that gaps that have been identified are being addressed through a coordinated set of training, mentoring, and knowledge sharing strategy. And finally, that the results of knowledge capture activities are being integrated into training materials. And conversely, the training activities are incorporating knowledge capture components as appropriate. Steps for implementing this practice are first to assess needs and gaps. This step identifies opportunities for improving integration and alignment across KM and training and development. Second, to look at how to link knowledge capture with training materials. Third is to look at ways to provide a more unified online access point for learning resources, documents, tools, and experts. And this may include creating AI-based tools to retrieve information where systems or sites are currently disparate. And finally, exploring opportunities to leverage existing formal or informal learning communities to identify training and development needs and gaps, to advance training development initiatives, to review and validate training materials, or to reinforce training objectives through presentations and discussions. Vermont, Louisiana, and Washington State DOTs provide some useful examples for this practice. Practice 9 involves strengthening integration of knowledge management and succession management. As with the prior practice, this may happen naturally when KM and succession management are under the same umbrella in the organization, but if not, there may be opportunities to plan and prioritize knowledge capture and person-to-person knowledge transfer activities for critical roles. Also to use knowledge capture activities to better understand critical competencies for key positions and inform employee development strategies. And finally, to build or enhance online resources that successor employees can use to be effective. Implementation steps for this practice include, first, identifying critical positions and risks related to knowledge loss. Second, adopting a proactive approach to conducting targeted knowledge transfer to address critical positions and risks. Then, to look at how to enhance available online information resources for successor employees, and look at ways to embed knowledge capture and transfer activities into the employee life cycle, including position description updates, onboarding, annual performance reviews, and exit interviews. And with the other practice, finally, to have a monitoring and adjustment step to keep an eye on this and make continuous improvements. And notable agency examples for this practice include Vermont, New Jersey, Texas, and Utah DOTs. The final category is information curation and management, and there are two practices in this category. Practice 10 is to curate and manage information about agency policies, procedures, and guidance, i.e. the authoritative information that talks about the what, why, and how of agency processes. This practice involves first a planning step to establish the scope and set up oversight or governance over the process. Second, a step to curate relevant content. Third, ongoing management of the content to fill gaps and periodically review and update it. And finally, periodic review of the process itself and making adjustments to ensure that it's sustained and improved as needed. Utah, Maryland SHA, and Washington State DOTs provide some useful examples for this practice. And the 11th and final practice is one that is emerging, but is expected to grow in importance and prevalence in the coming years. This practice involves developing AI chatbots and search tools to provide employees with easy ways to access authoritative agency information. Key implementation steps for this includes planning and scoping to identify the content to be included and establish an appropriate technical approach that both provides access and discoverability, but also protects internal agency information sources and is compliant with any applicable statewide regulations. Second, content preparation to remove or isolate outdated or extraneous material so that it won't be included in the discovery. Third, a build and test step, and that can involve a mix of external expertise and internal agency resources. And finally, deployment of the tool and periodic monitoring and refreshing of the tool to reflect changes to content, new requirements, as well as technology advancements. North Carolina and Utah DOTs have both pursued AI-based tools. And this concludes the overview of the KM practices document. We encourage you to consult the full document to learn more about these practices and how they've been deployed at different transportation agencies.
All right, thank you, Francis. So the final product area are communication resources. So after we've conducted the case studies, we thought that that was a particularly important area to communicate the information that was captured. And so what we did was we produced two types of products for each of the case studies. So a two-page flyer, which can be printed back to back or just as a two-page PDF. And so you can see here the flyer on Maryland State Highway Administration's KM case study. So it really highlights the key practices, the results, the why it should matter to you, and tips on what you can learn from it. Along with these flyers, we also produce a video that uses the case studies along with interviews with each of the KM leads from the states to communicate similar information in a video format. So you can see here is the one for Maryland with Chris Loki. And then I'll just go quickly through. Here's the flyer from Michigan DOT and highlighting their practices. Francis went through the specifics of each case study, so I won't repeat it, but you can see here how the two-pager can be very helpful and can be used by others to share this information in a meeting setting or a way to get people interested in KM in their own agency. And Aaron Rogers, who is the Committee on Knowledge Management Chair for AASHTO, was the KM lead at Michigan DOT. And here he is being interviewed. But the videos have, the interview is a subset of the entire case study that's in the video. And here's the flyer for North Carolina. And here is Allison Tamer with her part of the interview that's embedded in the video. And then here's the flyer for Utah DOT. And you can see everybody had slightly different practices that they shared through their case studies. And then here's the video, which included interviews with Lori Economy, their KM lead. And then finally, the flyer for Virginia DOT, and followed by the Virginia DOT video with Mary Waters, who was our KM lead who we worked with. So just kind of, moving on to, kind of implementation lessons for you as you think about taking on KM practices in your agency. So, we learned through the case studies and also with the capturing of all the practices that states are doing related to KM is start with a clear knowledge management value proposition. That's a critical ingredient for your success. And then begin with something that you find is practical and manageable in terms of the KM practices you're going to implement. And then integrating KM into an existing program is going to make it easier for you to both have success and to demonstrate the value. And then very importantly, having strong leadership support in your agency is something that is very important and super valuable for your success of implementing KM practices. And finally, just what were our key takeaways from this project? That we can see KM is increasingly important for transportation agencies. We definitely heard of greater interest as well as the desire to advance practice, to get greater value out of knowledge management so that they can capture the knowledge that's is there and not lose it. Many DOTs already have the practice elements that we've described in this project. So there are pieces of it already that you can build on. So look for those because maybe it's not called knowledge management, but it is a knowledge management practice. The project identified practical practices agencies can adopt. So just know that when you look especially at the KM practices organization and framework and the guidance that's provided, that's then tied to the case studies and the specific things that the case studies agencies are working on, that those are great places for you to focus on and use as a way to test out KM or an area of KM that you particularly find promising for what you need to do at your agencies to advance practices. And then the final takeaway is what we see is that KM programs often grow incrementally. So having a major initiative that says we're going to get this whole thing done and start and then go, is less likely to succeed than to start taking small bites of specific areas where you want to apply KM practices in a way that can show value quickly and to the groups of people that you want to make sure understand that KM can add value that actually is going to be important to your agency's meeting of its mission and its performance. All right. So with that, I am going to thank you, and Francis and I are available to answer any questions. We want to help everyone advance knowledge management practices in transportation agencies. Thank you.